Good morning, Rosenrod School. This is Patty Friesen, class of 98, and you're watching the R360 News.
Good morning to everyone watching in RedHawk's Nation, and welcome to your latest installment of R360 News. I'm your host, Bryn Laverne. Today is Wednesday, September 29th, and day 6 on the school calendar. In our lunch report, we have Subway Day on the menu for today, and on Monday in the Hawk's Nest Cafe, there will be crispy pierogies and farmer sausage. The final deadline for Life Touch picture orders to the school office is Monday, October 4th. Today is Orange Shirt Day. Thank you for wearing your orange shirt in support and solidarity of residential school children. All students wearing orange shirts, be ready for a photo op first thing in this morning. Your principal will come around to your classroom. Here we have Jackson Fair with another grade 8 video explaining one of the 94 calls to action for truth and reconciliation.
Call number 20 says, we call in Canada to respect the health needs of all Aboriginal people, no matter where they live in Canada. Problem. Canada is not giving proper health care needs to Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous people who do not live on a reserve. A reserve is a piece of land for the Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous people to live on. Solution. Now we ask the government to recognize, respect, and meet all the health needs of the Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous people in Canada. Answering this call will provide proper health care to the Métis, Inuit, and Indigenous people who do not live on a reserve. Thank you.
So tomorrow we have a national day to recognize truth and reconciliation. Why do we have the day off of school? Is it to catch up on our sleep, relax, play some extra video games? No, not at all. You know those calls to action that the grade 8s have started highlighting? Well, tomorrow fulfills the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to action number 80. It reads, we call upon the federal government in collaboration with Aboriginal peoples to establish as a statutory holiday a national day for truth and reconciliation to honor survivors, their families, and communities, and ensure that public commemoration of the history and legacy of residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. So tomorrow and every September 30th moving forward will serve as a day of remembrance, reflection, action, and learning. And before we sign off the air for today, the R360 News team has a very happy birthday wish going out to Chloe Blythe, Adrian Kilroy, Rachel Owen, and Kenesha Fair, who are all celebrating birthdays this weekend. Happy birthday, Chloe and Adrian, Rachel and Kenesha. As we sign off for the news today, Mr. Schervenberg has an interview with Miss Connie Wyatt Anderson, who works in the PAW Manitoba with the Treaty Relations Commission. The interview is 9 minutes long, and so if teachers are unable to watch it now, please make sure to have some time today to watch it with your class. Have a great day at school, everyone.
Good morning, RedHawk Nation. I am here today with a friend and colleague of mine, Mrs. Connie Wyatt Anderson from the PAW Manitoba. She and I spent a number of years working together with the province of Manitoba on designing our social studies curriculum for grade 9 and 10. Today she works with the Treaty Relations Committee of Manitoba, and I have invited her here to talk about truth and reconciliation as it relates to treaties and so on. Thank you, Mrs. Wyatt Anderson, for being on the program with us this morning. Let's begin. Just tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do with the Treaty Commission of Manitoba.
Thank you, Arlen, for having me here today. As you said, my background is just as yours was teaching school. I taught grade 11 and 12 mostly, high school history and geography for 20 years. Your question, though, is centered around what I do with truth and reconciliation. One of my biggest files over the last number of years has been, as you said, Arlen, with the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba. And the Treaty Relations Commission of Manitoba has been around for about 20 years here in Manitoba. And my role, because I'm a teacher, has been with their education wing for about the past 11 years. And we've created learning supports to help teachers teach about treaties. You might be asking, though, how does that fit into reconciliation?
Yes.
Well, I would argue often because our focus isn't exclusively reconciliation. Think of the NCTR, it's treaties, but reconciliation is about relationships. And really, that's the heart of treaty agreements.
Thank you. That is very informative. And yes, relationship is a huge piece of reconciliation. So as you know, Mrs. Wyatt Anderson, we live in southern Manitoba. We're a small community, a rural community. We have a number of Indigenous students who attend our school, but it is not the majority of our population. How do we in small town Manitoba connect with, develop relationship with, how do we practice truth and reconciliation, not just with Indigenous people, which is very important, but with everybody?
That's a super question. And I'm going to harken back a little bit to my own teaching experience. I'm joining you today from my home in the Paw, Manitoba. And the Paw is a little bit different in Rosenort in that our direct neighbor is the First Nations community. Like we cross a bridge on the Saskatchewan, and our neighbor, just like another neighborhood, we are to Opaskwayak Cree Nation. So one of my teaching career was on the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. And I think one of the best things to do, Arlen, is in reconciliation and is not trying to sound trite, but literally, who is your neighbor? I mean, my neighbor is a stone's throw right across, just down the highway from where I am here. I'm in a farming area, is First Nations land, the Opaskwayak Cree Nation. So some of the best places of reconciling, whether it's history, you know, what we know, or reconciling where we stand today, is literally looking at who's your partner. If I go back to this treaty relationship, you know, we share this land. Sometimes it's nice to literally start at home. What treaty territory am I on? Am I in Treaty 1, Treaty 2? I'm in Treaty 5 here in the Paw. Whose ancestral lands am I on? You know, what was the original language here? I'm not a Cree speaker, but I've learned to value and appreciate the richness. So sometimes, Arlen, literally, it's just kind of in your backyard. It's building those on-the-ground relationships. And, you know, oftentimes you'll see in curricula, Arlen, and I'm thinking about curricula, invite an elder to the class. Right. Like there's an elder just waiting down the wings, you know, all the time. It's not as easy. Like, I understand that. But you know what? Sometimes getting kids together is easy. I've been very fortunate, you know, of working with kids from Opaskwayak, my community, with kids from Minot, North Dakota, and Brandon. And, you know, let kids be kids. And by kids, I mean 17 and 18-year-olds, and let them hang out and be friends. I mean, long before Canada, 1867, and long before Treaty 1, 1871, there were relationships for hundreds of years between First Nations people and newcomers through the fur trade. So, you know, we have a model of working together that we actually can go back to if we just kind of take a pause and have a cup of tea with your neighbor.
That is very well put. Thank you so much. We have also families in our community who have adopted and fostered Indigenous students at a very young age. We have one family that I think has at least had 5 or 6 different Indigenous people in their home. How do we practice reconciliation and relationship with people who start these relationships at such a very young age and dedicate their family life to working with students from Indigenous backgrounds?
I think you have to make space for people to tell their own stories. I mean, think about how much of First Nations or whatever your background is, your history was really told by someone else. I mean, I think of my own family history. It was always, you know, typically told by academics far away that never visited your community. So one of the best gifts we could give to any kid, I don't care if they're First Nation, if they're non-First Nation, if they're a newcomer, is the avenue in the skill set, though. I mean, there are skills associated with history. And Arlen, you know this, just like there are skills with being a dentist. I mean, there's knowledge and there's skills. So give kids, whether it be First Nations kids, history teachers, social studies teachers, non-First Nations kids, the skills and the courage and the place to ask questions and tell their own stories. Right. Like, you know, I think I know when I was teaching in OCN, my students were all Cree, and every now and then my grade 12s would be the teachers. It wouldn't be me. I'd be leading them through something and they would bristle because as Indigenous kids, that wasn't their experience. And they were almost miffed because there was someone else telling their story.
So an interesting story from this community, my uncle, Dick Ides, was a historian in this community for many years. He loved history, and he told numerous times of a story about the Mennonites coming to this community. So back in 1873, a delegate of Mennonites from Russia came over into Canada. They were invited by the Canadian government as part of the settlement program to explore the land of Manitoba and decide if they wanted to move here or not. And so they had done some exploration, determined where they wanted to go. Turned out when they came in 1874 that that particular land area wasn't available to them. So they looked here in the Scratching River Reserve in southern Manitoba. And one of the things that was very important to Delegate Clausen was that there not be conflict with Indigenous people. The Mennonites were pacifists. They didn't believe in taking up arms, and they didn't want to live in conflict with any group of people already settled in this province. And so the oral tradition states that Delegate Clausen went over to the chief at the Roseau River Reserve, just southeast of us, and talked with him about settling in the Red River Valley. And the chief said to David Clausen, "You don't want to settle in this area. It is a disaster. All you're going to have is flooding. It is not a place you want to live." And Delegate Clausen said, well, no, they'd like to, because they'd experience with setting up drainage systems and so on in Russia and in Holland. And then the chief just said, well, all we ask is that we have access to the rivers and that we're able to collect reeds and so on from the rivers for basket weaving and so on. The buffalo, as you know, were long gone by that point. And so David Clausen agreed, and it was an informal oral treaty that he had with the chief of the Roseau First Nation. My wife, Lori, was at the Roseau a number of years ago chatting with one of the ladies there and recounted this story to her, and they both agreed that this very likely was the case, that these two leaders of communities entered into a relationship, into a treaty that allowed them to live together well. And so that's a story from this side of the river.
Just giving me goosebumps telling that story. You know what, Arlen? I think there's stories everywhere about people figuring stuff out, working stuff out, treaties, if you want to call them ad hoc treaties or treaties everywhere. Like my students told me that too. Like I live in a farming district just west of the pond. This would have been all Cree land. My husband's grandpa settled here. Same thing. He told me all kinds of stories. So I think hopefully part of healing and reconciliation is that the stories like you just told aren't going to be shoved to the background. They'll make their way to the front. They'll make. I'm hoping that's what you know, one of the darndest things is when you try and create community with people, the best thing that happens is a plethora of good stories.
Ms. White Anderson, it has been a pleasure having this conversation with you. I have truly enjoyed our time together. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to talk to us here in Rosenort about truth and reconciliation and the relationship that we can have with each other and with people in different communities. Thank you.